What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 9.18 is coming out tomorrow/today, or, if you're watching this video long after it was recorded, maybe it's already out. Who knows? The curse of videos that are recorded. Timing is unknown. Regardless, 9.18 is happening. As you can see right here, it is one patch before Worlds. And so let's talk about what's happening to the game as a result. Of course, 9.16 has remained the patch that all the teams, or pretty much all of the teams, qualified for Worlds on. North America was still on 15, but at this point, this patch has had a lot of data from competitive. They're going to be working on 9.19 right now. They probably already are a little bit already, but there's not going to be any new competitive data for 9.19. This is kind of the last one that gets to really react to how the playoffs were working. So that might inform 9.19 a little bit. Either way, 9.18 is quite pro-focused. There's a couple solo queue changes. Let's get into it. All right, so first off, Aatrox, one of the kings of pro play right now. Absolutely massive top laner, occasionally flexed in a mid. This is the go-to blind pick top laner. And one thing I do want to point out is I think this is a champion that is, though I think players or fans are a little bored of seeing him every time, Aatrox is still one of the more interesting champions in League. That's my opinion. So I don't think he needs to be heavily nerfed. Like, I'd be okay if Aatrox was still the #1 top laner in pro play. Just because he at least does interesting things, right? He's aggressive. You have to fight back and forth. He actually dies when you kill him, which is good. The revive removal, I think, was a positive. And in general, he creates action. So, like, I would prefer Aatrox be the #1 top laner over, let's say, Sion or even Jace to a certain degree. Either way, he is getting a much weaker early laning phase, only heals for 1/4 of the damage dealt when stabbing a minion, as opposed to all of the physical damage dealt. This is most important when he hits cannon minions. The cannons have as much health as champions, so it's actually very substantial. Dozens of health is lost every time he tries to stab a cannon minion. So a pretty meaningful cut to his durability there. The second one, this Q right here, I managed to miss this patch note when I was doing all my math, so this is a surprise to me. Either way, this is up to half damage on the Q. I want to point out, though, that the early laning phase, where he's actually trying to push the wave, 50 becomes 40% damage to minions. That is not a huge drop. It's 20% that matters. It exists. It is certainly relevant, but it is not 100 becomes 40. Once you're level 15 or whatever, and this is like 80%, and you're only doing half the damage, it's fine. You have so much damage anyway, you probably still kill the minion wave. Yeah, some are going to be left over. Yes, this will still matter in late game, but this isn't as big as you might think because he has a lot of overkill in the late game. He gets so much attack damage. This is still relevant, don't get me wrong, this still matters. This is a meaningful nerf. This is not the kind of nerf that will get people to stop playing him in pro. This is the kind of nerf that will drop his win rate. This will make the champion weaker, but Aatrox, I think, will still be, let's be really conservative, a top 4 top laner at Worlds without any further changes. Yeah, you might see more Jace instead, etc., but I think Aatrox will still definitely be around. Next up is Akali. Akali is another huge pro play champion that sadly has a kind of meager solo queue win rate. And so what the designers are really trying to do is find ways to chip power off Akali while still keeping her skill expressive because you want her to feel good to play, but trying to find ways to drop super high-end like Challenger and Pro play and not hurt Plat and lower, that kind of stuff. So R1 no longer stuns, and R's execute damage is lower, and R's cooldown is longer. Okay. So the no longer stun basically makes R flash less important. It also means your E is far less reliable. One of the big things that happens with Akali is that she hits you with R1. By hitting R1, E1 is guaranteed. Now you can no longer flash or run or anything because E2 is guaranteed to follow, and then R2 will kill you. Essentially, if R1 lands, you're already dead. You just haven't caught up yet. That's a Shen quote, but it works here also. So this is, I would say, deceptively a very big deal. It certainly is a stun. That matters. 0.5 seconds is not huge, but it exists. But it's the guaranteed E that's the really big deal, in my opinion. It also means she no longer has hard CC on the kit, so she can't stop teleports or any random channels. That can also be a really big deal for champion matchups. And champion matchups are something that really often helps pro play because they say, we can just play Malzahar in an Akali game, and don't worry, she can't stop the ulti. That can sometimes be really relevant as well. So I think this actually is pretty meaningful. Now, the second one is the R damage. It is down by 60, 30, and 0. The R cooldown is up by 30, 20, and 0. No, sorry, 60, 40, 20, and 0. My brain just like exploded for a second. So let's talk about those numbers right here. Here's the R2 damage. Now, I want to point out this is not every R2, all right? Sometimes there's D2. No, but the real point is this is only the maximum execute damage, which means a full health target is taking full damage regardless. It's 100% of the same damage as the previous patch. If they're at, let's say, 2/3, you're only doing about half of this. This is not as big of a nerf as it looks like on paper. Like, I think the R1 nerf is quite substantial. The R2 nerf is not quite as big as you might think. Also worth pointing out, by the way, that it still has the 0.9 AP ratio attached to it, so there is a lot of scaling damage that reinforces this. Also keeps her late game intact. Her early game is weaker. That's another interesting sort of shape to the champion. Excuse me, sorry. And then the cooldown being up by 40, 20, 0 is pretty meaningful as well. So this is a really big deal because this hurts her early safety a lot. Her early dueling is down. 60 damage here is quite meaningful. But also 40 seconds on the ultimate means she is really, really, really far more gankable. Far more gankable. And that's going to be a big deal. So Akali is going to lose a lot of pro presence overall. Next up is Annie, who now gains bonus movement speed that decays over the duration, 1.5, with her E. So now she doesn't necessarily need flash. She can press E to get in range for her ultimate. This is another chip at getting Annie a bit more skill expression, making her a bit more powerful in the hands of good players. I think this is generally pretty cool. Annie doesn't have any long-range tools. She's very range-gated, and so movement speed helps her bridge that gap. This does bear the small risk of Annie being overbearing at a certain point because Annie is so reliable. If she can now close larger gaps, she's now overbearing at more ranges. This has the chance of being pretty scary. That said, good Annies are already going protobot for these kind of purposes, so it's not that huge of a deal, but this can certainly matter. As recompense, her damage reduction is down by quite a lot, and the cooldown is much longer. So she has got less Molten Shields, less powerful, but they do make it faster. So here is this math there. Of course, you max E last, you still will, because the movement speed is based on Annie's level, not the rank of the ability. Although this would end up being 27% more. So this is like a 50% speed boost by the level 18, which is pretty big. But here's damage reduction before and after, right? It's down by 6 to 18, which if you sort of math this out as how much damage she takes, it's this. This is basically her durability difference right here. So means more in the late game. 7% less durable is not a huge deal in the early game for the first 13 levels. You're not going to feel this very much. It exists. It will matter. Don't get me wrong. But it's just not as big of a deal as these numbers probably kind of mean to you. It's not really half as good. And then even at the max rank, she's only 23% less durable. Again, that certainly matters. You can indeed burst Annie more reliably. This is relevant. Don't get me wrong. But maybe not as egregious as you might have thought from the numbers on hand. Next up is Aurelion Sol, who seems to be landing a little bit weak off the changes, and so they're giving him 65 more health. Now, I want to point out, that's actually a very high amount of HP. 2139 is very, very high. One thing that I find interesting is that Aurelion Sol has incredibly low base armor. It's 19. That is very, very, very low. So Aurelion Sol actually has decent armor scaling. Goes up to about 80, I believe, at level 18. That's not terrible. But it's kind of an interesting situation where Aurelion Sol's early game is actually quite good against mages, right? Standard mage magic resist and 575 health is quite good. So he's actually durable in AP matchups, but with only 19 armor, he is squishy in physical matchups. This is all colored by the fact that, again, runes exist, or stat shards, I guess they're called now, but I'm just going to keep calling them runes. So you can still get, like, I don't know, 16, I think, bonus armor or something like that. So, or 12. I actually forget because I just click the thing. I don't look at the numbers anymore. But you can bridge that gap regardless. But I always think these base set differences are interesting when you can kind of shortcut them so easily, in the early game at least. Whatever. Next up, Caitlyn gets 2 attack damage. Here you go. Cool. One thing I do want to point out is Caitlyn is one of those marksmen where people are still building double zeal on her, so she only really has 1 attack damage item. So this is actually more meaningful than it could be for a champion like, as we'll see later, Jhin. 2 AD on Jhin doesn't mean as much as 2 AD on Caitlyn because she actually needs the attack damage more. It's like a percentage difference larger. Echo gets 20 mana off the W and a half second on the W stun duration. That's pretty nice. The mana cost is right here. Pretty easy to look at. This is a very meaningful stun difference. Now it is and can be hard to land, don't get me wrong, but another half second is not trivial. So definitely nice stuff for Echo. It's another follow-up buff to Echo that was in 916, nudging him more towards landing the W for the payout. You can spam W more often. It's going to be pretty small. I'm going to probably guess it's 1% win rate or lower. As always, champs come into pro play when a pro decides to play it. That's really what it comes down to, is champions aren't in pro play until a pro plays them. Like, Ahri wasn't pro viable until PoE won the 3rd place match playing her. Didn't practice the champion, didn't go to his coaches in scrims and say, hey, I want to learn this Ahri counter pick. It was just game 5 and he was like, yeah, I think Ahri's good here. Yeah, this is how pro works. I want to continue to reiterate the fact that professional play is never as professional as you think. There is always a lot left on the table. Echo could very well be one of the champions left on the table. That is good, is viable, could be played, but pros just don't. They just don't learn them. It's always possible. Next up, Evelynn has 40% more damage when people have below 30% of their max HP, 40% more base damage, 40% more ratio. Well, I should say 20% more damage because instead of doing 2x, it's 2.4x. It's 20% more damage. I misspoke. My apologies because, that's not 40%. That's 20%. What am I doing? There you go. So, good job, Evelynn. Good for you. 20% more damage, sometimes the ultimate. Next up is Jhin, who has 2 more attack damage. These numbers are, at the end of the day, multiplied via his passive and everything else, but the percentages will not change. So here you go. As we said, it's only 1% difference here. At the end of it all, Caitlyn, remained 3 to 2%. This one flattened out because his attack damage growth is so high, and in the real game, he'll buy more raw attack damage, right? He'll buy an IE and an SSV for oftentimes. Next up is Caixa, losing 0 to 20% off of her E bonus attack speed. There's the data table. It doesn't matter until level 8. And then calculating with her actual per level attack speed, here is the actual DPS difference. Now keep in mind, as with all cases with things like marksman, she's of course buying real items in the real game, and so this is further flattened because she's got 100% bonus attack speed down the line from her Berserker's Greaves and her Rage Blade and other things. But ultimately, consistency-wise, this is still a eventually 10% DPS loss. In the real world, not a 10% DPS loss. Again, by the time this actually kicks in, you've got some items coming through. So, exists, does matter. Not huge, though. Caixa tended to be about the number 2, 3 bot laner in pro play. So, good to see a nerf there. Still waiting for the Ezreal nerf. At some point, we'll get one. One day. 5 damage off Kale E. Pretty small stuff right there. Here's the base damage difference. I'm counting her raw attack damage in as well, and it's an 8 to 4% damage drop. The more AD and AP she buys, the less that matters, as all things are. But okay. Oh, I'm a dum-dum. It's a buff. Hold on. We fixed it. It's 8 to 4% more damage. Moving on. Lee Sin has more base health and base attack damage and base damage on the R. Now, this is mostly rounding. By the way, you can always tell when a certain designer goes and does these changes because they're always these kinds of changes. Thank you, Riot Soter. I love you for rounding base stats. So, gains 4.2 attack damage. Actually, sorry, gains 4. Oh no, this one's 4.2. This is actually 0.18, not 0.2. Didn't include the 100th place. Doesn't matter. It's fine. But either way, right, gains a little bit of health, gains a little bit of attack damage, gains a little bit of R damage. Here you go. This is the data table. Again, these don't matter very much, right? It's just there because rounding is nice. It's like, well, I'm already here. This takes me like 0 effort to make these changes. I'm glad they're being done. I'm a big fan. So hey, small health buff, small attack damage buff, to the tune of 1%. The 25 damage on the R is a nice to have. Now keep in mind, Lee Sin also got some fairly recent buffs to I think his Q damage. And stuff like that. So it's just another little small nudge. And Lee Sin's already a little bit in pro play, right? We see the occasional Lee Sin pick, so we're going to see the occasional extra Lee Sin pick. Again, these are very, very, very small, but junglers love Lee Sin. It's like, hey, you remember Lee Sin? You want to play him again? These aren't big, but you see the patch and you go, maybe I will try him in scrims, or at least solo queue. So I like this. Lee Sin's one of my favorite champions. Cool to see buffs on him because I like playing him. Cool stuff. Next up, what if Misfortune was viable? E is the ability you should be maxing last. I actually occasionally maxed it second when I played Misfortune because of how good this rank up was, going from 28 to 60%. That no longer has a need. You are pretty definitively maxing E last now. And so joining up with everyone else, here is the slow difference, right? 40 to 60 instead of 28 to 60, which for most of the case is a 17% movement speed nerf, which is pretty meaningful. Right? The people you hit have 17% less move speed than before. They go up 0.6 instead of 0.72, 17% less. Yeah, that's actually pretty meaningful stuff. This will be felt. This will matter. This is gank assist. This is crowd control and team fight. This is a nice to have. So cool stuff, Misfortune. Way to go. Next up, more stat nerfs, right? Mana and mana regen get rounded, but the real nerfs are actual changes to the health and armor growth of the champion. And E, which normally was maxed second, has a much has a rank up on the slow that starts lower. So here's Nunu's health. It goes down 6% by the end of it all. Actually goes down below 2k, which is pretty meaningful. He's, of course, he always buys Cinderhulk, gets Stoneplate, stuff like that, but okay, pretty substantial health nerf right here. The armor goes down by about 9 as well, which, if you put all the numbers together, is an 11% drop in his physical durability. So 6% less durable against magic, 11% less durable against physical. That is pretty meaningful. Now, again, it's at level 18. He's a jungler. You don't get level 18 on junglers. Look at, a decent mid to end game for this guy, and it's 6% less health, 9% less physical durability. Still meaningful, still relevant, definitely matters, just not, super duper massive. Here is the mana before and after. It is 1%. Here's the mana regen before and after. It's 6 to 3%. Look at that 100th place. Look at that 100th place. It's beautiful. Way to go on this stuff. Yeah, look, it's just basic rounding. Doesn't really matter. It's rounding down. Again, the goal is to nerf. Nunu is an exceptionally high win rate jungler in solo queue. And one thing that I do think is valuable to look at, and I think this tenet still remains true, have yet to look at the numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's generally true. base stat changes are more solo queue sensitive than they are pro play sensitive. So if you ever have a champion that is overperforming in solo queue and not doing well in pro, I think a good first touch is base stat hits. Nunu's health and armor weren't terribly out of line. 570 to 2100 and 32 to 92 is not egregious for a frontline melee champion. Now he has what I would call underperforming sort of base stats for a melee champion. But that said, his Q is a direct to belly heal. He gets essentially free health in any given fight. So, much like Scion, to a certain degree, it's kind of okay to have below average health automatically. But just kind of, hey, FYI. Similar stuff for mana, still about 1k base mana. Again, I like when champions have almost exactly 1,000 mana at level 18. I think it's a positive. Mana regen remains around 3 per minute at level 18, 3 per second, 180 per minute. And then I didn't change the title here, but it's the E-slope before and after. And 50 becomes 300 to 50, which is 40% more movement speed for the first 7 levels of the game on your opponent. That is a very meaningful difference in how fast they can run. So these are substantial Nunu nerfs. I could expect almost as high as like 2.5%. I want to really point out, again, these are very small changes. If these were like, this was like, 25 mana and a full like 1 mana regen off, I would say, 3 and change. But this is pretty meaningful. I would expect several percentage points off for Nunu. Next up is Teemo. When you're blinded, you have a screen-wide light because you can't see him. It's blind. Move Quick has some iconography. R no longer gets broken by Rift Scuttle. They can bounce infinitely, and you can store more mushrooms. These are pretty meaningful buffs to Teemo. What's interesting is I feel like Teemo is generally a fairly high win rate champion. Also, again, this doesn't really matter this much until the late game. Right? This is level 11 plus, which of course exists and happens in almost every Teemo game, but these are very, very light buffs. Probably less than 1% overall, especially because this actually helps your opponents as well. This is actually a nerf. But hey, cool to see some modernization. Good stuff there. Now properly gains bonus attack speed against all blood-hunted enemies, so that when you W someone, when you W someone and attack them, you get attack speed. This is definitely meaningful. Also, there are probably some ways that Bloodhunt wasn't getting attack speed. Either way, last I saw, Warwick had a decent win rate. Warwick will probably still have a very high win rate. Probably won't see him in pro, but seems like a cool champion. Next up, Xayah is pretty much the number 1 pro play AD carry. So 3 armor off her base stats and 20 seconds flat on Featherstorm. Here's her physical durability. It's 2% less in basically all cases. Rounding keeps it there. Fairly meaningful R cooldown change as well. Xayah had both very high damage and very high overall durability. She was generally very, very safe. 76 is still a pretty solid amount of armor for a backliner. She's not really going bottom of the barrel here as far as that's concerned, but they're overall saying, yes, Xayah is a high damage marksman. She is going to put out lots of damage. She is very scary. Keep in mind that she can be a late game carry, but her safety is down. 2 flat armor is generally relevant all game long. A bit more killable, a bit more duelable by enemy marksmen. Additionally, 20 seconds on the cooldown. Now keep in mind, yes, she always buys Essence Reaver, so you always have, this is actually more like a 16-second nerf, but still relevant, still meaningful. You're still going to have a 14 to 18% increase on this cooldown. Definitely matters, definitely relevant, fairly meaningful nerf here. Xayah will absolutely still be in pro play. This is probably a 1% win rate nerf. It is not that meaningful. It doesn't change all that much about the champion, but worthy of a nerf. And at this point, Riot saying, you know what? Light touches, slight nerf to Caixa, slight nerf to Xayah, slight buff to Misfortune, slight buff to Jhin, slight buff to Caitlyn. Just edge them a little close together. And if you want to do stuff with that, you go for it. Next up is Zoe, who's getting 6 to 10 damage. 6 to 8 to 6 again more damage on her passive. Every time you cast a spell, it goes on your auto attack, and you more sparkle someone. I do want to point out that it's been a very long time since the passive damage and the Q per level bonus damage have been separated, okay? These are not affected anymore. This is only her passive. It is not her Q damage. More sparkles no longer applies to her Q, and it hasn't for a while. But they're buffing up the auto attack follow-up pattern of Zoe, which is probably, I would say, probably the safest place to add power in a non-egregious way, because the W, you pretty much can't gameplay it. It just fires off. The Q is arguably the more frustrating part of the kit. The passive actually requires her to stop and auto attack you and cast a new spell and auto attack you, and that seems fair. So here you go, 9 to 11% to 8 to 7 to 6 to 4 to 3% more damage on the passive. There you go, buddy. Not garbage damage. Again, there's an AP ratio that's unchanged here, so in the real world it goes down somewhat, but a pretty decent amount of bonus damage. A slight buff to Zoe, probably less than 1% overall, but okay. You can do some screen shake stuff. You can do some visual sliders like contrast, gamma, and brightness. There's a bunch of bug fixes. Some skins coming out. Some Star Guardians, some Dark Star Guardians. Some chromas. There you go. TLDR, patch 9.18. This is 90% pro focus, and there's 1 or 2 solo queue focused changes. Aatrox is losing a lot of his early sustain, most notably against cannon minions, and his wave clear is down a little bit in the early game and moderately in the late game. This is definitely going to have an impact, but Aatrox should still be in pro play. Akali loses the R stun on R1, which means you can't guarantee R into E, which is a very, very big reliability hit. Akali's chase down loses a lot of power here. Also with a 40-second cooldown increase at rank 1, her safety is down by a crap ton, and with 60, 30, and 0 damage reduced off her R2 max damage, she's going to lose some assassination potential as well. This is very big onto Akali. She could drop quite a lot off of pro play as a result. This is maybe heavy-handed. I'm not sure. It's definitely meaningful, though. Annie gets a bunch of movement speed when she presses E, but is overall less durable on the spell, and it has a longer cooldown. This is basically an offensive increase for Annie and a defensive decrease. This damage reduction change is a roughly, I think it's like 8 to 16% overall durability nerf to Annie with a shield on. It's certainly relevant, but it's not gigantic. Aurelion Sol gets a pretty meaningful health buff. Good for you. Caitlyn gets 2 attack damage. Echo gets 20 mana off W and a half second onto it. All small touches to bring them up. These are all aimed at pro. At least with Aurelion Sol, it's more follow-up because he got changed a little while ago. Evelynn gets some power back on her ultimate. They went a little bit too strong on her jungle clear nerfs. She was generally very high win rate, high ban rate, so dropped off there. And so they're raising her back up a little bit into more reliably executing her opponents. Jhin gets 2 attack damage. Caixa gets 0 to 20% attack speed off of her E. Keep in mind, rank 2 of the ability comes in at level 8, so her early game is untouched entirely. This ends up being an almost 10% DPS nerf at max rank. But the more you buy attack speed, the less this matters. Kayle gets 5 damage back on her E. Small buff there. That's nice. Psh, 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 hit people. Good stuff. Lee Sin gets 4 health, 1 attack damage, and 25 damage on R. Very, very light touches that go up. Not going to mean a ton, but Lee Sin's a cool champion. Miss Fortune already maxed E last. She should definitely max it last now. This is up to, I believe, like a 25% or something. Slow in actual meaning in the early game. This is very meaningful. This is going to be a pretty big difference in power. Her gank assist, her setup, her support assist, all that stuff, going to be a lot stronger. Good job, Miss Fortune. Good to see that change. Nunu losing quite a bit of health growth, armor growth, and a very small amount of mana. This is about 8% by level 18 in health, and ultimately about 11% in physical durability at level 18 here as well. This is a meaningful amount of health nerf. This is going to do a fair bit of heavy lifting. This part means almost nothing. E is something you max second, so again, this is going to be the full potency of the nerf up until level 8, which takes quite a while on a jungler. This is 40% more movement speed to whoever you snowball. That is a very meaningful change in how much they can get away and prevent from getting rooted. This is going to mean a lot. Nuna's going to lose a lot of win right here. Quality of life stuff to Teemo. Opponents know when they're blinded. He can watch his W duration a bit longer. Mushrooms bounce infinitely, and you can store up to 5 at max rank. Nice little minor buffs to Teemo. Probably less than 1% win rate, but cool to see changes to him. Warwick W now meaningfully different, more reliably gives him attack speed against Bloodhunter targets. That's good. That should happen. 3 armor and 20 seconds off of Xayah's base stats and our cooldown both as nerfs. Xayah, pretty much the #1 AD carry in pro play right now. These nerfs, she will remain a top 3 AD carry, I think almost certainly, but a bit more bullyable in lane, a bit more burstable. Overall, they are nerfing Xayah's early game and ultimately overall nerfing her safety. They're keeping her high damage. They are nerfing her safety. And yeah, enough that it's going to matter. Still going to be a high-priced pick. Zoe, again, I want to remind, the passive no longer affects Q. Q has its own per-level scaling. But this is, a decent sort of, if you count her auto attack damage, like an 8% damage increase in the early game. Tapers down to like 4% in the late game. But, non-trivial bonus damage. Gonna zap you for a bit more damage. Her trading pattern can be a bit more powerful. Q backwards, auto attack. Q forwards, auto attack. Hey, that's 12 damage in the trade. Not bad. Some video accessibility stuff. That's cool. Some bug fixes. That's the patch. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.